Hi, I'm Aron Bernstein. If you're going to build a house, every brick, board, and nail has to be in the right place. Well, in music, these raw materials are called intervals. Happy birthday. That song has a very wide interval, or in Beethoven's Fürlies, smaller intervals. So let's get started with these basic musical building blocks. An interval is just a difference of pitch between two notes. It's a measure of how far apart they are. Here's a large interval, the octave, and a small one, the second. As you'll learn, intervals are in everything. They make up melodies. They're the building blocks of chords, and plenty more. If an interval's notes are played consecutively, we call it a melodic interval. If they're played at the same time, we call it a harmonic interval. In music, intervals are named according to their spelling. If you have two people singing the same pitch, A for example, that's a unison, no difference in tone. For all the other intervals, we're going to envision them as a clock face. Clockwise we go up, counterclockwise we go down. So we'll start on A with a unison, and we'll follow along on the keyboard below and the staff to your right. Now we go up one letter to B, and this is a second. Even though they're only one letter apart, we always begin counting intervals on the starting letter. Think of this second as covering two keys on the piano, if that helps. And on the staff, seconds always look like this, from a space to the next line, or vice versa. Notice how a harmonic second has to be written with the top note shifted to the right for clarity. Now, for this second, we went from A up one note, but we could also go down to form a second, A down to G. And as you can hear, seconds are pretty dissonant, they clash. But here comes a third. We start back on A and skip letters up. Once again, we include the starting letter in our counting. A, B, C. This is a third. On the piano, it skips keys. And on the staff, we skip notes. Space to the next space, or line to the next line. Now, if we go back to A, we could also go down to make a third. A down to F. Obviously, knowing your musical alphabet backward is a great help when going down. And finally, thirds sound a lot better than seconds. They're consonant. All right, now the fourth. Counting our starting letter, we go A, B, C, D. And here's how a fourth sounds. Even more consonant than a third. This particular one is called a perfect fourth, and it has a spacious, hollow sound. Back to A, and we can also go down a fourth. A, G, F, E. On the keyboard, we cover up 4 keys with our fingers, and on the staff, it looks like this. One line or space bigger than a skip. Next stop on the interval wheel, the fifth. A, B, C, D, E. This fifth has the same open sound as the perfect fourth we just saw, so we call this one a perfect fifth. On the piano, we would need 5 fingers to cover it. And on the staff, a fifth is 2 skips, space to space to space, or line to line to line. Let's keep going up. We're on a fifth, so one more letter up makes a sixth. As you can hear, it's consonant, but not like a perfect fourth or a perfect fifth. It really sounds more like a third, and as we'll find out soon, thirds and sixths are closely related. Next, we add another letter and get a seventh. Notice on the staff, it's 3 skips from bottom to top. Sevenths are a lot like seconds, very dissonant. But adding one final letter brings us around to the letter we started with, A. Counting the lower A we started on and this higher A, we now span 8 notes, and this is the octave. After the unison, the octave is the most consonant interval we have. On the keyboard, we repeat letter names, and on the staff, it's 3 skips plus a step. Now there are intervals larger than the octave. You could go from this A, past the next A, up to B, and this would be a ninth. But you can see how it's really an octave plus a second. Go even farther and we have a tenth, which is an octave plus a third. Now there's a useful trick for remembering what all the intervals look like on the staff. Here they are again: unison, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and the octave. Notice how the odd-numbered intervals, the third, the fifth, and the seventh, contain both space notes, or both line notes. But the even-numbered intervals, the second, fourth, sixth, and octave, do not. If the bottom note is a space note, the top note is on a line, or vice versa. Moving on to inversions. In music, intervals are often inverted. That just means that we keep the same two letter names, but go in the opposite direction. So let's say we start on B. If I go up a letter, we get C, and this is a second. But instead of going from B up to C, we could also go from B down to C. And this isn't a second at all. It's a seventh, and sounds just as harsh. Now let's start with the seventh, say E up to D, but if we went from E down to D, that's a second. So remember these two intervals. Seconds and sevenths invert into each other. Now let's try thirds. C up to E is a third, but if we go C down to E, now we have a sixth. Let's start on a sixth. F up to D is a sixth, but if we invert it and go F down to D, it's now a third. So here's another pair of related intervals. Thirds and sixths invert into each other. How about fourths? D up to G is a fourth, but inverted, D down to G is a fifth. So fourths and fifths invert into each other. And finally, we see the same is true for the unison and the octave. So remember these pairs of intervals. Seconds and sevenths invert, thirds and sixths invert, fourths and fifths invert, and unisons and octaves invert. All right, to finish out our lesson, we're going to see these intervals at work in real music, which, let's face it, is the whole point of theory. When you look closely at this melody from Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor, you can see it's practically a study in every single interval we've just learned. Starting on A, let's figure it out. Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, fifth, fourth, third, octave, seventh, sixth, fifth, sixth, fifth, fourth, third. And that's all a melody really is, a bunch of intervals. But it's what Bach does with it that's so amazing. All done, and I got some worksheets for you. Go ahead and practice spelling out all these intervals. And it may not seem like it, but letter name spelling is essential for intervals, as we'll find out when we get into scales, chords, and a whole lot more. In the meantime, stay tuned for Intervals Part 2, where we'll encounter the different interval qualities. I'm Aron Bernstein, and I will see you later.